Welcome today to our continuing series, Questions and Answers for a World in Crisis. Today, Personal Effort, Part 1, from Sri Aurobindo. One must rely on the divine and yet do some enabling sadhana. The divine gives the fruit not by the measure of the sadhana, but by the measure of the soul's sincerity and its aspiration. I mean by the soul's sincerity its yearning after the divine and its aspiration towards the higher life. Also, worrying does no good. I shall be this, I shall be that, what shall I be? Say, I am ready to be not what I want, but what the divine wants me to be. All the rest should go on that base. It is not possible to get rid of the stress on personal effort at once, and not always desirable. For personal effort is better than tamasic inertia. What Brahmananda says about tapasya is, of course, true. If one is not prepared for labor and tapasya, control of the mind and vital, one cannot demand big spiritual gains. For the mind and vital will always find tricks and excuses for prolonging their own reign, imposing their likes and dislikes, and staving off the day when they will have to become obedient instruments and open channels of the soul and spirit. Grace may sometimes bring undeserved or apparently undeserved fruits. But one can't demand grace as a right and privilege, for then it would not be grace. The personal effort has to be transformed progressively into a movement of the divine force. If you feel conscious of the divine force, then call it in more and more to govern your effort, to take it up, to transform it into something, not yours, but the mother's. There will be a sort of transfer, a taking up of the forces at work in the personal adhar. A transfer not suddenly complete, but progressive. But the psychic poise is necessary. The discrimination must develop which sees accurately what is the divine force, what is the element of personal effort, and what is brought in as a mixture from the lower cosmic forces. And until the transfer is complete, which always takes time, there must always be, as a personal contribution, a constant consent to the true force, a constant rejection of any lower nature. At present, to give up personal effort is not what is wanted, but to call in more and more the divine power and govern and guide by it the personal endeavor. There are two possibilities. One of purification by personal effort, which takes a long time, another by a direct intervention of the divine grace, which is usually rapid in its action. For the latter, there must be a complete surrender and self-giving, and for that, again, usually it is necessary to have a mind that can remain quite quiet and allow the divine force to act, supporting it with its complete adhesion at every step, but otherwise remaining still and quiet. This last condition, which resembles the baby cat attitude spoken of by Ramakrishna, is difficult to have. Those who are accustomed to a very active movement of their thought and will in all they do find it difficult to still the activity and adopt the quietude of mental self-giving. This does not mean that they cannot do the yoga or cannot arrive at self-giving. Only the purification and the self-giving take a long time to accomplish, and one must have the patience and steady perseverance and resolution to go through. If there is not a complete surrender, then it is not possible to adopt the baby cat attitude. It becomes mere tamasic passivity, calling itself surrender. If a complete surrender is not possible in the beginning, it follows that personal effort is necessary. The practice of rejection prevails in the end, but with personal effort only. It may take a long time. If you can feel the divine power working in you, then it should become easier. There should be nothing inert or tamasic in the self-giving to the guidance. And it should not be made by any part of the vital into a plea for not rejecting the suggestions of lower impulse and desire. There are always two ways of doing the yoga. One, by the action of a vigilant mind and vital seeing, observing, thinking, and deciding what is or is not to be done. Of course, it acts with the divine force behind it, drawing or calling in that force. For otherwise, nothing much can be done. But still it is the personal effort that is prominent and assumes most of the burden. But the psychic poise is necessary. The discrimination must develop which sees accurately what is the divine force, what is the element of personal effort, and what is brought in as a mixture from the lower cosmic forces. And until the transfer is complete, which always takes time, there must always be, as a personal contribution, a constant consent to the true force, a constant rejection of any lower mixture. So long as there is not the full presence and conscious working of the higher force, some amount of the personal effort is indispensable. To do the sadhana for the sake of the divine, and not for one's own sake, is of course the true attitude. Yes, of course, you are right. The process of surrender is itself a tapasya. Not only so, but in fact, a double process of tapasya. And increasing surrender persists for a long time, even when the surrender has fairly well begun. But a time comes when one feels the presence and the force constantly, and more feels that that is doing everything, so that the worst difficulties cannot disturb this sense, and personal effort is no longer necessary, hardly even possible. That is the sign of the full surrender of the nature into the hands of the divine. There are some who take this position in faith, even before there is this experience. And if the bhakti and the faith are strong, it carries them through till the experience is there. But all cannot take this position from the beginning. And for some it would be dangerous, since they might put themselves into the hand of a wrong force, thinking it to be the divine. For most, it is necessary to grow through tapasya into surrender. By this yoga, we not only seek the infinite, but we call upon the infinite to unfold himself in human life. Therefore, the Shastra of our yoga must provide for an infinite liberty in the receptive human soul, a free adaptability in the manner and type of the individual's acceptance of the universal and transcendent into himself is the right condition for the full spiritual life in man. Vivekananda, pointing out that the unity of all religions must necessarily express itself by an increasing richness of variety in its forms, once said that the perfect state of that essential unity would come when each man had his own religion. When not bound by sect or traditional form, he followed the free self-adaptation of his nature in its relations with the Supreme. So also, one may say that the perfection of the integral yoga will come when each man is able to follow his own path of yoga, pursuing the development of his own nature in its upsurging towards that which transcends the nature. For freedom is the final law and the last consummation. Meanwhile, certain general lines have to be formed, which may help to guide the thought and practice of the sadhaka. But these must take as much as possible form of general truths, general statements of principle, the most powerful, broad directions of effort and development rather than a fixed system which has to be followed as a routine. All Shastra is the outcome of past experience and a help to future experience. It is an aid and a partial guide. It puts up signposts, gives the names of the main roads and the already explored directions, so that the traveler may know whither and by what paths he is proceeding. The rest depends on personal effort and experience and upon the power of the guide. The development of the experience in its rapidity, its amplitude, the intensity and power of its results depends primarily in the beginning of the path and long after on the aspiration and personal effort of the sadhaka. The process of yoga is a turning of the human soul from the egoistic state of consciousness absorbed in the outward appearances and attractions of things to a higher state in which the transcendent and universal can pour itself into the individual mold and transform it. The first determining element of the siddhi is, therefore, the intensity of the turning, the force which directs the soul inward, the power of aspiration of the heart, the force of the will, the concentration of the mind, the perseverance and determination of the applied energy are the measure of that intensity. The ideal sadhaka should be able to say in the biblical phrase, "My zeal for the Lord has eaten me up." It is this zeal for the Lord, utsaha, the zeal of the whole nature for its divine results, vyakulaya, the heart's eagerness for the attainment of the divine, that devours the ego and breaks up the limitations of its petty and narrow mold for the full and wide reception of that which it seeks, that which, being universal, exceeds and, being transcendent, surpasses even the largest and the highest individual self and nature. But this is only one side of the force that works for perfection. The process of the integral yoga has 3 stages, not indeed sharply distinguished or separate, but in a certain measure successive. There must be, first, the effort towards at least an initial and enabling self-transcendence and contact with the divine. Next, the reception of that which transcends, that with which we have gained communion, into ourselves for the transformation of our whole conscious being. The utilization of our transformed humanity as a divine center in the world. So long as the contact with the divine is not in some considerable degree established, so long as there is not some measure of sustained identity, sayuja, the element of personal effort must normally predominate. But in proportion as this contact establishes itself, the sadhaka must become conscious that a force other than his own, a force transcending his egoistic endeavor and capacity, is at work in him, and to this power he learns progressively to submit himself and delivers up to it the charge of his yoga. Namaste.